Hi there, and welcome to this short knowledge tutorial. This is for paper 1, the Western Front, and this is going to have a look at who cared for the wounded on the Western Front. If you have any questions, please feel free to comment below and we'll get started. So here we've got the groups who looked after the wounded. We've got the Royal Army Medical Corps, the Queen's Alexandra Nursing Unit, the Volunteer Aid Detachment, and the one that gets a lot of giggles, the First Aid Nursing Yeomanry. And as you can see there, I'll put the link to it, but there's a wonderful video on women in the First World War done by the BBC, and I'll put that in the description because obviously I can't put it in here. So, Royal Army Medical Corps. First thing to remember is the Royal Army Medical Corps, or the RAMC as it's otherwise known, wasn't simply just doctors. It was specifically that, but there was also a whole heap of support staff around that. Drivers for the ambulances, stretchers, bearers. And if you have a look at this recruitment advert for the First World War, it gives you all the examples of people in occupations in the Royal Army Medical Corps. And its aim was primarily to keep the army fit and healthy. In 1914 it had just 9,000 men in its rank, but by 1918 it swelled to 113,000 men, 12 times its size. This was because simply the number of wounded in the First World War required medical attention, but as more doctors were needed, the age restrictions for those serving on the Western Front rose to 45. And that was down to the fact that clearly there was a need, but also that the duties that they were performing wouldn't be requiring the level of physicality that would be required of typical infantry regiments or regiments of the line. Medical staff, however, had to learn how to deal with new types of wounds and the sheer number of casualties they faced. So these were very, very new challenges for them. New types of wounds, you're looking at issues like poison gas, artillery. This was a very, very different kind of war than had been fought previously. And linked to that was just the sheer number of casualties. For example, 38,000 wounded on the first day of the Somme. So clearly that gives us an indication about how difficult this was. If we go back to, we'll move on to the next slide. The Queen Alexandra's Imperial Military Nursing Service, or QAMS. This was the main body of the nursing units in the British Army. In 1914 it had just 300 nurses, but by 1918 10,000. And this, as it says there, it really shows a shift in attitudes towards women serving near the front line. These would be sometimes in the casualty clearing stations, certainly in the base hospitals, which were still within the French, Belgian, British sector. In 1914, the British Army accepted nurses who came from the Queen's Alexandra Imperial Military Nursing Service. However, and therefore other volunteers were turned away, and they would typically join the French or the Belgians. That changed when the VADs units were formed, which then takes us on to these people here, the VADs. And as the war dragged on, there was an increasing need for volunteers, and it therefore changed the Army's view of nursing and simply using people from the Queen Alexandra's Imperial Military Nursing Service. So the VAD was formed, and their job was really to support the nurses. Jobs ranged. You had cleaning, cooking, washing, some nursing, and the VADs were typically the middle class women who were joining to mop the fevered brow of the wounded. But as the war progressed, the VADs took on more and more nursing treatment, and people like Agatha Christie, a famous criminal writer, she was a VAD during the war, and she took on pharmacy duties. So here we've got, as I said, the one that creates a little bit of mirth, Fanny, the First Aid and Nursing Yeomanry. This was founded in 1907 by a man wounded in the Sudan, a British campaign in Africa, and it was designed to be a nursing cavalry who would gallop to the aid of the wounded. Now, obviously, this was a little bit redundant on the Western Front. So in World War I, they were ambulance drivers and nurses, originally part of the Belgian Army, mainly because the British Army rejected them and said, no, we've got our nursing service. But they became part of the British Army in 1916. And one Fanny unit ran the Calais ambulance convoy, and this was a convoy that would move wounded from hospitals in the French-Belgian sector of the British Army over to Calais, then to catch ships to take them back to England. And it had 22 drivers and 12 ambulances. But one difference between this and other units was that the Fanny unit also provided mobile kitchens for soldiers and even baths. So there was also an element of morale there that it was aiming to develop. So obviously I said we'll put this back into the video, and I'll put the link in here because obviously I won't be able to play it, but hopefully this has been useful. If you have any questions, please feel free to comment, and thanks for listening.